There's something about the US Open that makes it stand out. This year's Open was the 50th anniversary of when it was last played on grass. A novelty of a surface now, it was the overwhelming norm when tennis became popular in the 19th century, with clay gaining steam soon after and the advent of hard courts also soon after. Recreational courts, followed by professional events, slowly but steadily began shifting surfaces from grass and clay to hard courts. The US Open was caught right in the middle of that transition and is the only slam that's been played on grass, clay, and hard courts. Why? Perhaps that's because the US Open is something of an antithesis to Wimbledon's staunch traditionalism. It's the slam that's the first in line to embrace meaningful change. From using technology like Hawkeye and electronic line calling, to overhauling the whites only dress code, implementing tie breaks to decide sets,
Red flags appear.
In the tiebreaker, first 1 to 5 wins it.
and being the first to adopt equal pay for men and women.
And I am so delighted that for the first time, the women's prizes will equal the men's.
How about that?
It's become the major that breaks from tradition. In that short transitionary period, there's only one person who won the US Open on all three surfaces, Jimmy Connors. In fact, Jimbo reached the final all 3 years it was held on clay, and that short stint on clay paved the way for the US Open to adopt hard courts, its playing surface of choice to this day. But behind the tournament's reason for adopting all three surfaces is a man who had immense foresight and vision. Drawing from his own struggles, he helped establish new rules and conventions that modernized tennis, changing the sport forever. To understand why the US Open embraced playing on all three surfaces, we need to know more about the tournament's history. Because the 1881 US National Championships doesn't really resemble the 2024 US Open in any real way. In 1881, the tournament was held in Newport, had a men's singles and doubles draw, and was open only to US Lawn Tennis Association members. The US National Championships were held in many locations over the years, with the men's singles event held in Newport, the men's doubles event was held in Boston for several decades, and the women's tournament was held at the Philadelphia Cricket Club. Not the Philadelphia Tennis Club, the Philadelphia Cricket Club. In fact, it wasn't even contested in New York until it was shifted to Forest Hills in 1915. For nearly a century since its inception, the US Championships and then the US Open were held on grass. But soon after the Open era began, the convention of lawn tennis began to fade, hastened by hard courts that were robust, cheaper to build and maintain. Everyday tennis just wasn't being played on lawns anymore, and players began complaining of the grass used at the US Open and its uneven bounce.
Bad bounce, Ace.
First bad bounce of the day.
With many types of surfaces to choose from, the threat of California usurping the championships looming, and an emphasis on improving TV visibility also in mind, there just had to be a change. But the switch to clay was one that no one could anticipate. While all other clay events used red clay made by crushing bricks, the US Open used green hard true clay made by crushing igneous basalt. While green clay isn't as slow and soft as red clay, it was still significantly slower than grass courts, which saw a majority of players with a big serve and crafty hands at the net succeed. Meanwhile, the clay neutralized big serves required more endurance and a more complete game to come away as the winner. Shifting from a very fast playing surface to a significantly slow one changed the face, arms, and legs of the tournament. Heavily derided at the time, in hindsight, playing the US Open on clay did make some sense. It fixed the issue of bad bounces and leveled a playing field that used to see Americans, Brits, and Aussies dominate. And it also split the Grand Slam calendar into 2 clay and 2 grass events. While shifting to clay was a controversial decision, the 70s was a time of
The revolutionary change in tennis.
with a mammoth number of futuristic changes, and it could happen only because of one man. It's not a stretch to suggest that Bill Talbert's vision for the US Open was shaped by his own life. A type 1 diabetic, Talbert was diagnosed at the age of 10, taking insulin just 6 years after it was introduced. Doctors told a young Bill that he couldn't exert himself physically and was prescribed insulin shots and bed rest. Instead, he picked up a tennis racket and went on to win multiple Grand Slam titles. An athlete whose type 1 diabetic is uncommon to this day, but in the mid 20th century, Talbert was the equivalent of a sporting unicorn. Experimenting with different regimens to help keep a handle on his disease became a part of his life, and Bill risked hypoglycemia every single time he took to the court. He was even found in Mexico in a sugar coma. Overcoming diabetes and going on to win the biggest trophies in the sport shaped his character in a big way. His openness to change and experimentation in his personal life spilled over during his tenure as the US Open's tournament director. Some of the biggest and most influential changes at the tournament can be directly attributed to him. And that's visible most in this stretch in the 70s, including when clay was introduced at the Open. But that wasn't the only change that year. It was the first time a slam scheduled night session matches, which turned out to be a massive hit and a huge crowd puller. While Connors is the only player to have won the same slam on all three surfaces, Chris Evert, the only woman to have won the US Open on clay and hard courts, came tantalizingly close to having the same unique record. Evert's unmatched skill on the clay allowed her to win all three clay US Opens.
Chris Evert will dominate, especially on clay, where she reigns alone.
When Talbert returned as the tournament director in 1978, the US Open made its final switch to hardcourts and also shifted venues from Forest Hills to Flushing Meadows in Queens.
Leave here to go to hardcourts at Flushing Meadows to leave an elegant private club setting for a public park facility. For some people, they weren't ready to embrace that, but I believe that the USTA leaders who brought that change about were smart because they were gazing into the future.
Which is now home to the largest ever tennis stadium in the world. Talbert was the tournament director long enough to see his vision for tennis being embraced across the world. The entire professional tour uses tie breaks.
Tie break it is.
Has night lights, provides equal pay for men and women, and has adopted hardcourts. While Talbert won 9 doubles Grand Slam titles, his contribution to the sport is big enough that his best shots were heard not only on the tennis court, but transcended above it.